At 2:56 on the morning of November 21st, 1944, in the middle of the Formosa Strait, Commander Eli Reich stood on the open bridge of the submarine USS Sealion and fired 6 torpedoes at a ship he could not see. The night was overcast. No moon, visibility 1,500 yards, and the target was 3,000 yards out. A shape on a radar screen, second in a column of heavy warships that had been crossing the strait at 16 knots in a dead straight line, as if there were no such thing as an American submarine. Sealion was on the surface, alone, inside the escort screen of a Japanese battle force. The nearest destroyer rode just 1,800 yards from her target. If a lookout on that destroyer picked out the low black shape to the west, Sealion would die on the surface, 80 miles from anything friendly. The torpedoes ran. Reich swung his ship and emptied 3 more tubes, the ones aft, at the third heavy ship in the column. Then, at exactly 3 o'clock, sound came back across the water. The patrol report gives it a single line. Saw and heard 3 hits on first battleship. Several small mushrooms of explosions noted in the darkness. Small mushrooms. Reich did not like those words even as they went into the log. A torpedo that kills a battleship does not make a small explosion. For the next half hour, Sealion ran with depth charges rumbling far behind her, dropped by escorts pounding the wrong patch of ocean. "They think we came in from east, evidently," the report notes, almost amused. And at 3:30, Reich put down on paper what he believed he had just accomplished, not a victory. This: "I've made a bust. Looks like we only dented the armor belt on the battleships." He had set his torpedoes to run shallow, at 8 feet, so they could not pass under anything. Shallow also meant they would strike a battleship where she is hardest, on the thick steel of her belt. By his own reckoning, he had just put 3 torpedoes into a capital ship and scratched her paint. He chased her anyway. For 2 more hours, Sealion clawed after the retreating force through a rising gale. Engines pushed past their rated limit, salt water coming down the conning tower hatch, while the wounded shape on the radar screen refused to slow down. And at 5:24, the horizon to the northwest caught fire. The report reaches for the only image that fits. It looked like a sunset at midnight. The largest pip on the radar screen faded and vanished. Where a battleship had been, 2 destroyers milled in the dark. Then the log entry ends with the sentence every submarine officer in the Pacific would have given a year of his life to write. Battleship sunk. The sun set. Now, here is what the man on that bridge did not know. He did not know the name of the ship he had just killed. Neither did the United States Navy. In all 52 pages of Sealion's patrol report, in every endorsement stapled to it, the battleship has no name, and in the American files we have been able to reach, she would not get one until the war was over. He did not know that his torpedoes had done exactly what torpedoes are supposed to do, that the small mushrooms had opened her to the sea, and he did not know what turned 3 survivable holes into roughly 1,200 dead men, 2.5 hours later. It was not his torpedoes, and it was not the escorts. It was the single quality that ship had been built around, the thing she was famous for. We will get there. And one more thing he did know, better than any man alive. Eli Reich had met the Imperial Japanese Navy up close once before. 3 years earlier, on a pier in the Philippines, he had stood in the smoke and watched Japanese bombs burn an American submarine down to a wreck. That submarine was called Sealion, the first Sealion, his. December 10th, 1941. The Cavite Navy Yard, on the shore of Manila Bay, 3 days after Pearl Harbor. At Mackinac Wharf, the boats lay nested 3 deep. The submarine Sea Dragon against the pilings, the submarine Sealion moored outside her and outboard of them both, the minesweeper USS Bittern. At about 10 minutes past noon, the air raid alarm sounded, and out of the north came 54 Japanese bombers in 2 even formations of 27. They did not hurry. They did not have to. Aboard Sealion, Lieutenant Commander Richard Voge watched the first stick of bombs fall 100, maybe 200 yards astern of his boat, and understood the arithmetic instantly. They were being bombed from altitude, and a moored submarine has no answer to that. He ordered every man below. Men remembered the order later, because it is the reason most of them got to remember anything at all. The next stick straddled the nest, and two bombs arrived almost together. The first struck Sealion's conning tower, wiping out the machine gun platform men had stood on moments before, and burst outside the hull above the control room. Bittern, moored right alongside, logged the moment from a few yards away. One bomb hit conning tower of USS Sealion directly, and the blast threw burning liquid across the minesweeper's deck. A steel splinter from that hit crossed to Sea Dragon inboard, punched through her conning tower, and killed Ensign Sam Hunter, the first American submariner to die in the Second World War. The second bomb went into the water, through Sealion's ballast tank, through the pressure hull, and burst inside the after-engine room spaces, where the electricians stood watch. 4 men died there. The Navy's official history of submarine losses records their names: Sterling Foster, Melvin O'Connell and Valentine Paul, electrician's mates, and Ernest Ogilvy, machinist's mate. We name the source out loud because that is what actually exists. No muster roll for that week survives anywhere we could reach. Only the loss history and the museum records that agree with it. Then, Cavite began to burn, and the yard's water mains were dead. So the fire on a United States submarine was fought the way fires were fought 2 centuries earlier, with buckets passed by hand by sailors from the minesweeper alongside. Bittern paid for her berth as well. 2 of her own crew died in her mess spaces in that same raid, and her report sets them down as plainly as she set down the bomb that hit her neighbor. Sealion never dived again. The nearest working repair yard was Pearl Harbor, 5,000 miles the wrong way across a Japanese ocean. On Christmas Day, her own people lowered 3 depth charges into her flooded compartments and blew her apart where she lay. When the Navy later wrote the official history of its submarine war, the chapter of losses opens with her. First name on the list. The bombs killed 4. Cavite cost a 5th. Chief Machinist's mate Howard Firth was taken prisoner in the Philippines and did not live to come home. Hold that name. We will come back to him at the end because the record does, and the record is exact. If your family carries a name from that yard, from Sealion or Sea Dragon or Bittern or the Cavite shops themselves, put the name and the ship in the comments. Fewer people are left every year who can, and this is exactly the place where it keeps. Lieutenant Eli Reich was one of Sealion's officers that noon. Later accounts call him her executive officer. The last surviving muster roll, from October 1941, lists another man in that job, and no roll for December exists at all. So we will say only what the documents can carry. He was one of her officers, and he stood on that pier, and he watched her burn with his shipmates' bodies inside. The United States Navy does not retire the names of its dead. In 1944, a new submarine went to war carrying the name Sealion, hull number SS-315, a fleet boat with 10 torpedo tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft. And command of her went to Eli Reich. In November 1944, Sealion left Pearl Harbor for her 3rd war patrol with 75 men aboard. 12 of them had never made a war patrol before. In her tubes and on her reload racks, she carried 22 Mark 18 electric torpedoes, each with a Torpex warhead, and her orders took her west, toward the Formosa Strait, the funnel of water between Formosa and the Chinese coast that every Japanese convoy and every Japanese warship had to thread on the run between the empire and its southern conquests. She wounded herself before she ever saw the enemy, twice. On November 16th, during a routine check of the torpedo firing circuits, tube number 8 fired. The outer door of that tube was shut. The torpedo went through it. 300 pounds of impulse air had been left standing on the tube. The interlock was forced, the ready-to-fire lever came up, and a 2-ton torpedo punched through the closed door of its own submarine and vanished into the sea. The report is blunt about the wreckage. The outer door linkage was bent completely out of shape. Impossible to move, it says, by hand or power. 1 tube of 10, dead for the rest of the patrol. A fleet submarine was now heading into enemy waters with a hole she had shot in her own nose. 2 days later, at 10 past 5 in the evening, the battery compartment of the torpedo resting in Tube 5 exploded. Hydrogen, building inside the charged battery, touched off when power went onto the circuit meant to burn it away. The crew hauled the ruined weapon out of the tube, and at 7:14 that evening they fired it over the side, into the open ocean. The report lists it with bookkeeping calm, by serial number Torpedo 5629, expended. Then it does something better. It prints the dead weapon's charging history like an autopsy and arrives at an uncomfortable conclusion. The fleet's manuals contained no doctrine at all for venting hydrogen out of a charged Mark 18 before putting power on it. The fix that eventually went up the chain came from one of Sealion's own junior officers. Remember that officer. He has another part to play in this story, and it is not about torpedoes. 22 torpedoes had come aboard in Pearl. 2 were already gone, and neither of them at the enemy. The hunting ground did its best to make things worse. The patrol report grumbles about it in the dry voice of a man dodging traffic. Hundreds of junk scattered across the strait, so thick the submarine had to swerve to keep from running them down in the dark. 2 floating mines, horned and armed, sighted and logged with their positions. Japanese patrol planes working the Formosa shore, and a new kind of escort in the shallows. Trawlers that did not ping with sonar at all, but crawled along slowly, engines quiet, and listened. This is the ship, then. One tube wrecked by her own hand, a green quarter of her crew, 20 usable torpedoes in a strait full of eyes. And the eyes were looking. In the 24 hours before what came next, the report counts at least 5 aircraft, and 2 of those slow listening trawlers combing exactly the stretch of water Sealion was working. On the night of November 20th, the sea around her was smooth, black, and empty, with the visibility closed down to 1,500 yards. At 20 minutes past midnight, the radar operator saw something impossible. 20 minutes past midnight, November 21st, 3 pips on the radar screen, sharp and steady, at a range of 44,000 yards, 22 miles. In 1944, submarine radar did not see ships at 22 miles. The operator's first honest conclusion was that they were looking at land, some uncharted rock of the Chinese coast throwing back the beam. But the land was moving, and it was moving at 16 knots. By 0048, the picture had resolved into 4 ships at 35,000 yards, and the patrol report stops pretending to be calm about it. The greatest ranges we have ever obtained on our radar. Even the escorts, a fraction of the size, were registering at 22,000. The atmosphere over the strait that night was bending the radar beam over the horizon, handing Sealion a gift no submarine had any right to expect. 4 ships in column. Reich took the parade for what it looked like. A cruiser at the head, then 2 battleships, then a cruiser at the tail, with destroyers riding on the flanks. Course 060, speed 16, and no zigzag. Heavy ships of the Imperial Navy were crossing submarine water in a ruler straight line, as if the war had not been going on for 3 years. Reich did not question the gift twice. He put Sealion on the surface at full power and began the oldest move in the submariner's book, the end around, a long sprint up the enemy's flank, out at the edge of radar range, to plant himself in the column's path. For 2 hours the boat hammered west and north through the dark, engines wide open, while the plot on the chart slowly bent in her favor. At 0245 she was there, ahead of them, throttled back, lying in the path of the column. The escorts were not making it easy. The nearest destroyer rode just 1,800 yards from the second ship in column, which meant Sealion's torpedoes would have to pass close under an enemy's nose, and Sealion herself was standing inside the screen on the surface, counting on nothing but the darkness of a moonless, overcast night. At 0256, Reich fired the 6 forward tubes. Depth 8 feet, 10 seconds between fish, a 1-degree spread, contact exploders, range to the target 3,000 yards. The target, the second ship in column, speed 16, holding course 057 like a train on a timetable. Then he swung the boat hard and at 02:59 emptied 3 of the 4 tubes aft at the third ship in the column, the one he took for the second battleship, at 3,100 yards. On the bridge, the quartermaster stared at that third ship's silhouette and said out loud what everyone was thinking. The towering superstructure climbing over the horizon had the unmistakable pagoda shape of a Japanese battleship. At 0300, the first salvo arrived. 3 hits, seen and heard, on the first battleship. Small mushrooms of explosions in the darkness. At 0304 came something much bigger. On the bearing of the third ship, a heavy explosion tore the night open, a sheet of flame that shot up, lit the sea, and died almost at once. At least 1 hit on second battleship, the log says. Remember that flash. It is not what anyone on Sealion thought it was, and the families of the men it killed would learn what it actually was long before the American Navy did. By 0308, the escorts were awake and angry, and long strings of depth charges began rolling through the water. All of them fell far away to the east. The Japanese had guessed the attack had come from the other side, and they were savaging an empty ocean. Sealion, on the surface, ran clear and watched. And then came the sour arithmetic of 0330, the entry we started with. 8 feet of depth had been the careful choice. Insurance against torpedoes running under in a seaway. Against an armored ship, it was also the worst possible choice, and Reich knew it. 3 hits on a battleship, and the battleship was still in formation, still making 16 knots, still walking away into the north. I've made a bust. Looks like we only dented the armor belt on the battleships. Every submarine commander in that war knew the drill for this moment. You have hit them, they are awake, their escorts are hunting, and the sane entry in the log is attack completed, results observed, withdrew. Reich wrote a different kind of entry. Sealion turned north and went after them. The legend and the log do not match here, and the log is better. On paper, the ship Reich was chasing could make 30 knots. On paper, Sealion could make barely 20, and that is on trial day, with a clean hull and a calm sea. A fleet submarine does not run down a Kongō-class battleship. The reason a chase existed at all was that the Japanese force was still steaming at 16 knots, and for the next hour and a half, it still did not zigzag. The enemy was not outrunning her pursuer because the enemy did not yet believe the pursuer existed. So the margin was 2 knots, and Sealion went and took them from her own machinery. The engineers put 25% overload on the engines and held it for half an hour, and then kept the boat at the ragged edge past that. And the report preserves their complaints like flies in amber. Sparking commutators, hot motors, a growling engine room watching its gauges climb into the red. 17 knots out of a boat rated for 20 on her best day, in a sea that was no longer anything like calm, because now, at last, came the storm. The smooth black water of midnight had been building since about 2 in the morning, and by 0406 the log calls it force 5 to 6. A full gale funneling down the Formosa Strait, seas breaking over the low hull, and salt water coming down the conning tower hatch into the boat with every roll. The lookouts on the bridge wedged themselves in and took it. Ahead, somewhere in the spray, was a battleship. Behind, nothing but ocean. The enemy had already proven he was willing to bomb at random. At 0406, the Japanese finally began to zigzag. Somebody over there had done the arithmetic of the last hour and drawn the obvious conclusion. Weaving cost the formation ground. The straight-running submarine gained. And then, at 0450, the radar screen told a new story. The column was coming apart. The main body was pulling ahead and away, but one large pip with 2 small ones in company was falling behind, and falling behind fast, 15,000 yards, and closing. The battleship Reich thought he had failed to hurt was slowing down at last, and 2 destroyers had stayed with her like nurses at a stretcher. Sealion, 5 torpedoes forward and 1 aft still in her working tubes, began her run-in. She never got to fire them. At 5:24, the horizon to the northwest lit from end to end. The men on Sealion's bridge watched a glow like a false dawn climb out of the sea, hang there and die. On the radar screen, the big pip simply stopped existing. Two small pips remained, circling where it had been. The officer of the deck reached for words and found the ones the report keeps, a tremendous explosion. It looked like a sunset at midnight. 2.5 hours after 3 torpedoes had struck her armor, without another shot fired. The battleship with no name was gone. Battleship sunk. The sun set. Aboard Sealion there was cheering, and then there was the gale, and the 2 destroyers, and a long, careful withdrawal through heavy seas. And underneath the cheering sat a set of questions nobody on board could answer. What ship was that? Why did she blow up when nothing was shooting at her? What had those 3 small mushrooms actually done? Reich's own log had called the attack a bust, and now the target had erased itself from the ocean, and no one within 5,000 miles wearing an American uniform knew why or even what had just died. Those questions would keep for a year. The patrol would not wait that long. Sealion stayed on station, 11 usable torpedoes left in a boat with 9 working tubes, and the Strait was not done with her. On the night of November 26th, the freak atmosphere over the Formosa Strait handed her one more impossible gift. A radar contact at 70,000 yards, 35 miles. The report itself, in its radar section, shrugs at the number and blames the weather, the beam bending over the horizon on layers of warm air. This time the night was nothing like the last one. A near full moon, 7/8 lit, and visibility so sharp that from Sealion's bridge the target's silhouette was visible to the naked eye at 14,000 yards. Another battleship, 3 destroyers around her. 5 days after the greatest night any submarine crew had ever had, Eli Reich lined up on his second battleship of the patrol and fired the 6 forward tubes at 4,300 yards. Every one of them missed. His entry does not flinch. He fired without a full firing solution. The torpedo run was too long and he knew it, but decided a BB was worth this chance. He believed the target zigged away seconds after the salvo left the tubes. The 3 destroyers came around. This time there was no overcast to hide in, and no gale. Sealion went down and put herself on the bottom of the strait. 280 feet down, engines stopped and lay there in the mud while the ocean above her filled with propellers. In the report's words, a single sound head was the only source of information about whether the next hour held a depth charge pattern or nothing at all. The men lay still and listened to the enemy through it. The log closes that attack with 3 words of bookkeeping. Ships sunk, none. That is the actual texture of this war. The same commander, the same boat, the same waters, 5 days apart. One night, you erase a battleship. The next, you put 6 torpedoes into open water and spend the morning lying on the seabed, listening. In December, Sealion came into Guam with 5 torpedoes left. The patrol's closing pages settle the cruise with a Clark's poetry. 4,475 miles from Pearl Harbor to the hunting ground, on 54,567 gallons of fuel. 12 days in the area, 10 of them spent submerged. 5 men promoted in rank along the way, and provisions for 30 more days still sitting in the storerooms when she tied up. What ended the patrol was none of that. It was the torpedo count and the standing rule behind it. When the fish are gone, you come home. And then the paperwork began. And the paperwork is where this story turns strange. The squadron commander endorsed the patrol on December 6th. The commander of the entire Pacific submarine force endorsed it on December 17th, and credited Sealion with a battleship of 30,000 tons sunk and a second battleship of 30,000 tons damaged. 60,000 tons of enemy capital ship in one attack, and the submarine combat insignia authorized for the whole crew. It was one of the great patrol endorsements of the war. Go through every line of it and you will find something missing. There is no name, not a guess, not a believed to be. American intelligence could not tell Reich which battleship he had killed, because as far as the Empire of Japan was concerned, nothing had been announced, and the sea does not file reports. The ship that burned like a sunset at midnight sailed out of the American record the moment she sank, unnamed. So the questions Reich carried out of the strait stayed open. What follows is the other half of the night, the half nobody on Sealion could see, assembled after the war from Japanese track charts, survivor accounts, and interrogation files. This is where the answers were, all along. Start with the column itself, because Reich never knew what he was actually aiming at. The parade that crossed his radar screen at 16 knots was not a cruiser and two battleships and a cruiser. It was the light cruiser Yahagi leading, and behind her in order, the battleship Kongō, the battleship Nagato, and the battleship Yamato, the largest warship ever built by the human race, riding at the tail of the line where Reich had marked down a cruiser. Survivors of the fight at Leyte Gulf a month before, running from Brunei toward the home islands. In the darkness of November 21st, a single American submarine with 20 usable torpedoes had planted herself in the path of what remained of the heart of the Imperial fleet and fired 9 fish into it. The 6 forward torpedoes went at the second ship in column. The second ship in column was Kongō. Her name comes from a mountain in Japan, and the mountain is named for the Vajra, the Buddhist symbol that stands for 2 things at once: the diamond that cannot be broken and the thunderbolt that cannot be stopped. She was the oldest battleship in the fleet and the strangest pedigree in it. Laid down by Vickers in England, completed in 1913, the last capital ship Japan ever ordered from a foreign yard. Her own country then rebuilt her twice, stretched her, reboilered her, and turned her into something the Imperial Navy prized above armor: a battleship that could run at 30 knots. The Kongō class were the fastest battleships Japan had, and that speed meant the Navy used them everywhere hard for 30 years. American Marines knew her personally. On the night of October 13th, 1942, Kongō stood off Guadalcanal and walked hundreds of 14-inch shells across Henderson Field for over an hour. One of the worst nights of the entire campaign for the men in the holes under that barrage. Her sister Kirishima died a month later in the night action off the same island. By November 1944, Kongō was the last of her class still steaming with the fleet's main body, 31 years old and still keeping station with ships half her age. Sealion logged 3 hits on her. Kongō's survivors counted 2, 1 forward in the chain locker spaces near her stem and 1 amidships. 2 ledgers, both written by honest men in the dark, 300 yards of night and a war between them. They have never been reconciled, and we are not going to pretend to do it here. What matters is what the water did next, and on that, both sides agree. And the 3 stern torpedoes, the ones aimed at the second battleship. The pagoda silhouette the quartermaster saw was Nagato, and every fish missed her. But one of them kept running, and at 0304 it found the destroyer Urakaze, station keeping on the far side of the column. The sheet of flame Sealion logged as a battleship hit was Urakaze exploding. She went down in minutes, possibly taking her own depth charges with her as she sank. And she took every man aboard, her captain and Captain Tani Tamotsu, who commanded the destroyer division from her deck, and every sailor with them. Because no one survived her, and no other ship was placed to watch her die, almost nothing can be known about how she went. No one on Sealion knew a destroyer had died at all. Now Kongō. 2 or 3 torpedo hits below the belt of a ship built when armor was designed against guns, not underwater blasts. Flooding started forward and would not stop. And here the Japanese force made the decision that decided everything. The formation did not stop, and neither did she. Kongō held her place in the line at 16 knots, listing slowly, driving her wounded forward sections into a rising head sea. Her gun crews, at least some of them, spent that time shooting at the sky. Aboard the Japanese ships, the first assumption was air attack, night bombers, and anti-aircraft fire went up into an empty overcast, while the actual enemy ran on the surface 12,000 yards abeam, nursing overloaded diesels. The one weapon that could have mattered, the escort's depth charges, spent themselves east of the track, where no submarine had ever been. Understand what 16 knots means to a flooded hull. Water is patient at anchor and murderous at speed. Every knot of way pressed the sea harder against Kongo's strained bulkheads, and one by one they let go. Compartment by compartment, the flooding walked aft, and the list grew. Not because Sealion was still shooting, but because Kongō kept running. A month earlier, the giant Musashi had died in the Sibuyan Sea in much the same way, driven on while the ocean worked at her wounds. The Imperial Navy's engineers understood the mechanism. Its admirals that night chose speed anyway, because stopping in submarine water is its own death sentence. There were no good choices left, and that is precisely the point. 3 torpedoes from a boat Reich thought had failed had put the unbreakable diamond into a corner where every remaining option killed her. At 0440, the flagship finally cut her loose. Kongō fell out of the line and turned for Keelung on the north tip of Formosa, 65 miles of water away, with the destroyers Hamikaze and Isakaze standing by her. That is the moment Sealion's radar saw the column split, 1 big pip and 2 small ones dropping back. Reich took it for his chance at a cripple. It was a dying ship trying to reach a hospital. She never got close. 15 minutes after she turned, the list was 45 degrees. Her engines had stopped. The order came to abandon ship, and men were going over the side onto a hull that was rolling under them as they went. And at 5:24 in the morning, with the list past 60 degrees, her forward 14-inch magazines let go in 4 detonations. The explosion tore the battleship apart and lit the horizon that Sealion's bridge watch was staring at. From the bridge of Yamato, miles ahead, Vice Admiral Ugaki looked back at the glow where Kongō had been and set it down in his diary. The sun set. That is what it was. And here is the part worth being exact about, because it is the answer to the question this night has been asking since the first 3 torpedoes hit. The magazines did not sink her. She was already sinking, stopped, capsizing, her crew ordered off her. There was no fire aboard to set the magazines off either. She never reported one, and no survivor described one. The Japanese reconstruction of that night puts it flatly. The explosion was redundant to the sinking, and it was the chief reason so many men died. Her speed killed the ship. The blast killed the crew. Hamikaze and Isakaze pulled 237 men out of the gale-whipped water, 13 officers and 224 petty officers and men. The senior survivor was her secondary battery officer, a lieutenant commander named Takahata. Everyone above him in the ship's company was gone. Her captain, the division staff, and, if the Japanese records are right, Vice Admiral Suzuki, commander of Battleship Division 3, though no first-hand document we could reach confirms the admiral's presence. So take that name as the records give it, not as gospel. The reconstruction that counts them one at a time puts the dead at about 1,250. Most accounts round that down to 1,200. On a crew that size, the rounding is 50 families, and we are not going to round it away. Kongō was the only battleship an American submarine sank in the entire Second World War. The only one. And the country that did it did not know for over a year. In every wartime American file we could reach, the kill stays anonymous. 60,000 tons. No name. The earliest United States document we have found that sets the word Kongō next to the word Sealion is a ship's history summary dated December 21st, 1945. 4 months after the surrender. Eli Reich fought the rest of the war, took Sealion out again and came home, all without ever being told on paper what he had done in the early morning of November 21st, 1944. The 2 destroyers that spent that dawn pulling Kongo's survivors out of the storm had 1 more week of the war to give. Hamikaze and Isakaze were sent almost straight from that rescue to escort the brand new supercarrier Shinano on her first voyage. And on November 29th, 8 days after Kongō, they watched another American submarine, Archerfish, kill the largest aircraft carrier on Earth. Some of the sailors they fished out of the water that morning had now survived 2 of the greatest submarine sinkings in history inside 9 days. The Empire's giants were being eaten in the dark, one by one, and the men on the small ships saw all of it. There is one more survivor of the night of November 21st, and you can still hear it. Weeks before the patrol, a CBS News correspondent had sailed on Sealion and left behind a piece of his equipment, a sound recorder. When the boat went to battle stations against the Japanese column, one of the crew hung its microphone next to the intercom in the conning tower and let it run. The machine caught the attack as it happened. The Rangers called out. The orders, the voices of a submarine crew taking a battleship, recorded 3 feet from where Reich's officers stood. As far as anyone knows, it is the only sound recording of a submarine attack to survive the Second World War from any navy. And here is exactly what that recording is, because you will meet copies of it online with big claims attached. The original was optical film. After the war, it was transferred to 78 revolutions per minute discs at a Navy sound laboratory run through Columbia University in New London, and a narrator's voice was added at the start and end. Decades later, one of Sealion's own crew laid music and his own narration over a cassette copy, and that cassette is how the recording reached us. So, what exists in public carries 2 layers of other men's voices over the real thing, and parts of it are genuinely hard to make out. A recording from inside the fight, yes. A clean, untouched original, no. You deserve to know the difference, because the difference is the whole reason this channel reads documents instead of repeating descriptions of them. The crewman who preserved that sound was named Fred Schuler. And Schuler is not a name from a museum plaque. He is in the patrol reports themselves. Ensign F.G. Schuler, Sealion's electrical officer, the man who built a speaker adapter for the boat's radio gear on one patrol and whose fix for the torpedo battery ventilation problem, the same hydrogen problem that cost Sealion a torpedo on November 18th, is written into the report of this very patrol as a recommendation. The officer who kept the boat's circuits alive is the man who kept her voice alive. That is not a coincidence. That is simply who he was. Everything you have heard tonight stands on that kind of paper. The timestamps, the ranges, the depth settings, the words sunset at midnight, and I've made a bust. All of it is from the 52 declassified pages of Sealion's Third War Patrol report, which we went through line by line, and from the Japanese track records and survivor accounts assembled after the war. Whether 2 sides disagree, 3 hits or 2, 1,200 dead or 1,250, you heard both numbers, because choosing one and hiding the other would be tidier and false, which leaves only the ledger of names. Ensign Sam Hunter, killed on Sea Dragon by a splinter from the bomb that hit Sealion, the first American submariner to die in the war. Sterling Foster, Melvin O'Connell, Valentine Paul, Ernest Ogilvy, the 4 who died in Sealion's after compartments at Cavite. And Chief Machinist's mate, Howard Firth, who was captured when the Philippines fell and died a prisoner on August 9, 1942. He lies today in the Manila American Cemetery, Plot N, Grave 60, an hour's drive from the pier where his boat burned. 3 years and 11 days separate the bombs at Mackinac Wharf from the sunset at midnight in the Formosa Strait. The Navy's official history of the submarine war opens its list of lost boats with the first Sealion. The list of battleships sunk by an American submarine has exactly 1 entry on it, ever, and the second Sealion wrote it, with an officer of the first one standing on her bridge. He waited over a year to learn the name of the ship he killed. It was the name of a mountain, and the mountain was named for the thing that cannot be broken. His boat's name was already carved on the other side of the same war. If your father or grandfather served in the submarine force or stood on Henderson Field in October 1942 under Kongō's shells, or served in Sea Dragon or Bittern at Cavite, write his name and his boat or his unit in the comments. And if your family's story is on the other side of this water, a name from Kongo or Urakaze, that name belongs here too. The arithmetic of that night counted all of them. These men deserve to be remembered by more than a tonnage figure in an endorsement, and every name written under this film is one more that does not dissolve into silence. If this kind of history, taken from the original pages, is worth your time, you know what to do. Just let us know you are here.